Everybody's got a price, it's the $1 million man. Podcast in demand. Understand, everybody's got a price. $1 million man. Everybody's got a price. $1 million man. Everybody's got a pod, it's the $1 million man. Podcast in demand. Understand, everybody's got a price. $1 million man. Everybody's got a price.
What's up, everybody? It's Marcus D'Angelo, and we are back for another episode of Everybody's Got a Pod. And, of course, I can never do it without the man himself, WWE Hall of Famer and legend, the $1 million man, Ted DiBiase. Ted, we're back. I've missed you, man.
Hey, man, I missed you too, buddy. It's time to go, though, right?
Absolutely. And, brother, this episode is going to be money because I was doing some research for Jake's podcast, and I was looking through old issues of The Observer, and I stumbled across the one where Meltzer described your signing with the WWF. And when I read the description of the whole thing, I had like a million questions that came to mind. And I was like, you know what? It's time. And we're gonna finally discuss your signing with the WWF and all of the nuanced details behind all of it. So that's our subject today. And we'll kind of do a little bit of the setup before we start to get into the nitty-gritty of your signing. We'll start here. In the April 13th, 1987 issue of The Observer, Meltzer drops the bomb that Bill Watts and the Crockett's have come to terms on a deal for the Crockett's to acquire the UWF. We discussed this before, Ted, that a lot of people across the wrestling business, still to this day, when you ask them about it, they view this as Bill Watts taking advantage of the Crockett's, fleecing them, and getting a substantial amount of money out of them. The Crockett's, on their end, from this deal, I don't know how much money they gave to Bill Watts, but I guess it was a substantial amount of money. The Crockett's, for their end, would get enhanced syndicated television network, more than a dozen rings, and arena contracts. What they also got was Bill Watts' company debt and the headache of having to negotiate individually with UWF talent. So, Ted, I bring all that up to say, in your estimation, was this just a case of Bill Watts being a better businessman than the Crockett's, or was this a good opportunity that maybe the Crockett's didn't take full advantage of?
I would just call this is Bill being a very, very good businessman. If there's anything Bill always was, it was a good businessman. And it's kind of like, and where I was concerned in all this, it was kind of like I had been on a tour of Japan, when all this went down. Mm. And so, it's kind of like, I'm trying to think who it was. I think it might have been Bruce Pritchard that I talked to, said, hey, listen, by the way, when you get back to Mid-South, Bill Watts is no longer your boss. Jim Crockett is, Bill, sold the thing to Crockett. And then it was also Bruce who said, and whatever you do not sign anything with Jimmy Crockett before you have an opportunity to talk with Vince McMahon. He is extremely interested in you.
Yes. That
came straight from Bruce Pritchard. And so, the rest is history. I don't know, the Crockett's, they might have been, I don't know, they just seemed real cocky. Mm. Just like, okay, you're a promoter. What am I supposed to do? Kiss your ass? No.
So the Crockett's probably saw this opportunity from Bill, and they were like, we can take the UWF and do more with it than Bill ever could have. And as it turns out, this kind of, a lot of people point to this as sort of like their undoing. They put themselves in debt with Bill's debt, and that's kind of the long and short of it. And I do want to talk more about this conversation with Bruce Pritchard, and then of course you coming into the WWF. But before we get there, Ted, I do want to ask, Bill Watts relinquishing control. That is not a very Bill Watts thing to do. Bill Watts liked to have control, and I think that he enjoyed being a promoter, or else he wouldn't have done it for all those years. Did you ever think that you would see the day when Bill Watts would give up his wrestling promotion?
Well, I don't, don't really know, but I mean, and I never really took time to think about that. But like again, what I see Bill being is a very shrewd businessman, and when he made this deal with Crockett, it put him in a position where he can now go basically and retire to
Hmm.
do whatever the hell he wanted to the rest of his life because he had the money to do it.
Whatever the case was with this purchase of the UWF, it led directly to this report from the May 25th Observer. Boy, this is what I referenced here at the top of the show, where I read something from the Observer and it brought a lot of questions to my mind. So I'm really excited to get your take on this and ask you some questions. Here we go. Here's what Meltzer had to say. May 25th, 1987 Observer. In another biggie, which we touched upon last week, Ted DiBiase, considered by most experts as one of the best five pro wrestlers in the world, signed late last week with Titan in a major surprise. DiBiase had reached a handshake agreement just a few days earlier with Jim Cornette Promotions to remain with the UWF for a reported $250,000 guaranteed over the next year. The deal would have allowed DiBiase to keep his lucrative Japan commitments, and this is a big money deal. And by the magnitude of the contract alone, guaranteed DiBiase top star status with Crockett over the next year. In fact, DiBiase was no doubt in the thick of all the major UWF angles set for upcoming months. I don't know that DiBiase wasn't offered a guaranteed contract by Titan. However, for him to back out of such a lucrative deal, he must have been convinced that he was going to be pushed as one of Titan's major attractions. About the only thing through the Titan grapevine I know about DiBiase is that he'll be used as a heel and he'll have a unique gimmick. So, Ted, that was a lot of information and brings up a lot of questions. I guess the first thing I want to ask you about is, can you tell me about negotiating with the Crockett's? Do you remember being offered guaranteed contract of $250,000 per year plus the Japan concessions?
Nope.
No.
No, I don't think I ever. I don't think I ever talked to any of them.
And you said Bruce Pritchard said, "Do not talk to the Crockett's," right?
And yeah, he says, don't talk to the Crockett's because Vince McMahon is very interested in you, and so that's what I did. And so I waited around and finally I got a call, and I went up and I had my first meeting with Vince, and he said, Ted, he says, it's just, I remember when you were here before, and you worked for my dad when he was still the man in charge, and and obviously it just wasn't your time. And I said, I do, and I said, I know that, and I said, I'm a bigger guy now. I've been in the gym, and so in that first meeting, he told me, he said, Dad, he says, you are definitely one of the best workers, one of the top heels in the country, in anybody's arena. And he says, but he says, I've got this idea. Everything in wrestling has been done and redone. And he says, this is something fresh and new. He says, this has never been done. And he says, but here's the deal. He says, I can't tell you what it is until you agree to come on board with me, because if I tell you what it is and then you don't come on board with me, then I've given away a great idea.
Yep.
And I could understand that too. So, reality is, brother, I was ready to sign right there, right then. And I said, well, but I didn't want to seem too anxious, and I did wanted to talk it all over with Melanie, but I know when I talked, well, the one guy I always talk to is Terry Funk.
Mm.
And when I told him, he says, Teddy, he says, if Vince McMahon says he's got an idea, something that you're just fit for, he's pack your bag, don't look back. go. Because Terry saw what was happening too. I mean, it was Vince McMahon Jr. who changed the whole wrestling world.
Yep.
All of a sudden, and it didn't take very long. All of the territories collapsed because they couldn't compete with it. And the funny thing, Marcus, is that he went to all those promoters and told them what he was going to do, and invited them to join him. To be a part of the bigger thing. And I think he did that because he knew what that response would be. Here's a bunch of guys, who have had their own deal for however long it was, and now they're gonna bow down to a new king, and the king on the block has hell no, right? And they did.
They were probably stubborn.
The only ones that I think joined Vince were the Briscoes, because they saw it, as a plus.
That's what brought about that Black Saturday in 1984. The Briscoes sold their shares, and all of a sudden, Vince McMahon is on Georgia TV.
Yeah.
Now, Ted, I think that a lot of listeners on the surface are going to hear this and say, like, wait a minute. Why wouldn't you at least go and negotiate with the Crockett? See if you can get a competing offer. I think though, like for context, WWF is just coming off of WrestleMania 3. This wasn't just and this was not a small event. This was one of the biggest events in the history of professional wrestling. And you were on the outside looking in at that moment, probably like, boy, right. That would be nice.
Oh yeah. When I read it in the paper, WWF sets world indoor attendance record, 93,000 people. By the way, that record still hasn't been broken.
Mm-hmm.
They still hold the record for the largest crowd ever, or I guess indoor crowd, 93,000 people at the Pontiac Silverdome. And so I saw that while I was in Japan. I saw it in the paper in Japan, and I said, well, if I'm going to stay relative to wrestling in the United States, then I'm going to have to go to work for Vince.
So that kind of answers the question why maybe you didn't at least even go listen to what Crockett had to offer. You're getting an offer from the biggest wrestling promotion in the world, and the owner of that promotion is saying, "I've got a one-of-a-kind gimmick for you." Like I'd be about through the to the moon.
And then when I signed with him, and he told me what it was, I went, "Oh my God." And so, it's kind of like, he basically said, Ted, he said, the one thing everybody hates is someone by virtue of their wealth who bullies people. And I tell everybody now, I said, if Vince could have been a character in his own show, he'd have been me.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, because, everybody hates that guy, who bullies people, with his wealth. And I started laughing. I said, I can't stand guys like that myself. He said, but we're going to try to make the world believe that you're really that guy. Now, here's the kicker, buddy. We're going to fly you everywhere first class. The only two other people that got first class airfare were Andre and Hogan.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else went coach. And I guess, once you've been used to working territories and driving every day, coach doesn't look bad. but and he said, and here's the deal. I expect you, so we're gonna, you're gonna have limousine service, when you get off the plane, from the airport to the hotel, to the Coliseum, back to the hotel, back to the airport, wherever people see you publicly, they will. It's going to look like you're really this wealthy guy.
So he gave you accommodations, right? It was like a stipend of how much?
Oh, yeah. I started off here. His secretary came in and counted out $2,000 in brand new $100 bills. Here's your flash cash. And he says, here's what I want you to do. He says, now, if you abuse this, you'll lose it. You know, but he says, you got to pick your spots. For example, you walk in a restaurant, you know, and you look around, you just get up and announce yourself. Hey, everybody, my name's Ted DiBiase. I'm the $1 Million Man in the World Wrestling Federation. And today's your lucky day because I'm picking up your tab. And I'd have Virgil there, and Virgil would go around, pick up all the checks, and then add them up. I would pay it, take the receipt, and take the receipt back to Vince, to the office, and he would replenish the money.
Mm-hmm. And it's a business write-off for him.
Exactly. It's a business write-off for him.
Marketing, yeah.
Yeah, and so marketing his product, and you know, I thought I might get heat from some of the guys, but I didn't. You know, and they pretty much. Well, number one, I think most everybody respected the fact that. Now, I don't want to say this and sound like I'm bragging, you know, but Dave Meltzer said DiBiase, one of the top 5 heels in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you know, I didn't want to throw that out there.
But you are. Yeah, and also you're a second generation wrestler. You've made all the territories. You've established a reputation.
Yeah.
If anybody deserves this, you know, if it's some dude who's just, you know, started 2 years ago, that's one thing.
So, you know, I didn't get any, you know, all the guys were like, hey man, if he didn't offer that to me, man, I'd have jumped on it.
Hell yeah.
And so first class airfare, you know, the limousines were like, you know, not everywhere you go, but airport to hotel, hotel to Coliseum, back to hotel, back to airport. Wherever you were seen publicly, you know, for the most part, we want the people to see the appearance wealth, you know. So, you know, can't have the $1 Million Man riding around in a Toyota. And so, and he did that, you know, he did that for a while, but I mean, it got to the place where, you know, instead, you know, instead of doing it all the time, it became the big shows, you know,
Yes.
like WrestleMania and whatever, you know, like
SummerSlam and
SummerSlam, the big shows. We did it, and he said, you know, then he said, but when you're not getting a limousine, I expect you to, you know, rent like a big, you know, big car, Cadillac, whatever. So
now, Ted, you know that I love hypothetical questions, so I do have to ask you one when it comes to the possibility of the Crockett's. You know, it was pretty much a foregone conclusion, and I think I even heard Ric Flair or Arn Anderson say that if you had come to the Crockett's territory, you were going to be part of the 4 Horsemen. So there's that factor. There's also, I do also have to know if the Crockett's had offered you a guaranteed contract, which, by the way, during this time, folks, guaranteed contracts were unheard of. You were just paid off the houses back in those days. If the crowds were great, you made some good money. If the crowds were not so great, you were fucked. So a guaranteed contract was not a thing back in those days. So hypothetically, Ted, if the Crockett's had offered you $250K guaranteed and allowed you to continue going to Japan, would you have turned down the Vince offer to go to the Crockett's?
You know, I don't think so. I don't think so, only because everybody saw what Vince was doing. Everybody, you know, it's like, you know, if it had been tempting, you know, but we're talking about the Crockett's, you know, buying Mid-South, and then they have Charlotte, you know, like, which, you know, were 2 of the biggest territories in the country, but that's all they had. They weren't the machine that Vince was. They didn't have, I don't think they had the kind of capital to compete with him. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
That was the deal. It's like, here's this guy who's, he's fixing to take over the world.
Okay, guys, time to pause the show to talk about one of my favorite sponsors, and a sponsor that I know is a huge favorite for all the men listening to the podcast right now. Of course, I am talking about Blue Chew. By the way, not just a favorite for the men. I think the ladies can really appreciate the benefits of Blue Chew as well if you smell what I'm stepping in. Blue Chew is like a cheat code for your crotch, pal. Stronger, harder, longer lasting. It's like somebody gave your downstairs a little pep talk. And brother, Blue Chew is the original brand offering chewable tablets for better sex. Guys, you know that moment when you're coming in from grocery shopping, and if you're like me, you want to make one trip. You grab everything all at once, fill up your arms. For me, it's like I'm from my shoulder all the way down to my wrist, and then my hands are full of groceries trying to get into the house and not have to make a second trip. Well, let me tell you, Blue Chew is so effective, you're going to have another appendage to hang groceries off of to bring all those in, because, brother, it is going to get your dick rock hard. You're going to love it. Your partner is certainly going to love it. If you haven't tried Blue Chew yet, you could be missing out on the very best sex of your life. But listen, it isn't just about performance. It's about legacy, or third legacy, if you will. Give her group chat something to talk about. You know what those girls are on there texting about you. Why don't you give your wife or girlfriend or significant other, spouse, whoever, something good to talk about? Nothing is going to make you more of a legend than a little Blue Chew. It's time to discover your options at BlueChew.com. And we've got a special deal for our listeners. As always, get your first month of Blue Chew free. Just use promo code EGAP at checkout and pay $5 for shipping. That's it. I'm telling you right now, you are getting erections sent to you in the mail for free. You really cannot do much better on a deal than that. Like, honestly, what do you have to lose? Just give this thing a try. If for whatever reason you end up not liking it, don't do it again. All you lost is $5. It is seriously worth just trying out. Not just for you. Do it for your partner, pal. Join Blue Chew's mission to upgrade humanity one thrust at a time. Head to BlueChew.com for details and safety information. And we want to give Blue Chew a big thanks for sponsoring Everybody's Got a Pod. So, a lot of people say that, it's about being at the right place at the right time. I think a lot of it is knowing where to be at the right place at the right time. And good on you, Ted. You saw the writing on the wall after WrestleMania 3, and you made the right move.
Yeah, but I still think about it sometimes, Marcus. Stan Hansen. He stayed with Japan, and that's what he did. Stan Hansen didn't end up being really well known in the United States,
right?
But I don't know what It's like, if I'll put it this way: if I was getting $1,000 a day, he was getting more.
Yep.
He was the guy. And even when I went to Giant Baba and said, look, this is an opportunity I can't pass, and I hope you understand that, and I thank you. I said I'm going to finish out, and Baba was great. He said, thank you very much, and the door is open. In other words, anytime you want to come back, just call us.
So an ace in the hole, which is great.
Yeah, very much so. So
now I do have to ask about Stan Hansen, because for frame of reference for our listeners, you guys were really kind of setting the world on fire over there in Japan as like the top gaijin tag team.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden you've got to tell your buddy Stan, hey brother, I know that we're killing it over here, but I gotta go. How does Stan Hansen react to you going to Titan?
He understood. He understood. And of course, I was thankful to him. I don't know how much of that idea was his or the Japanese company, Baba's company. And sometimes I still, even now, all these years later, I still wonder, man, I started thinking about that. I could have been doing a lot of other things. When I was home. That's the one thing about going to work for Vince is now I'm going all over the country, and it's like when I first started, it was 3 weeks. There were 21 days out, and then a week off. 21 straight days, 21 days, 21 cities. And that's when they were building. And then, oh my gosh, it's just incredibly. And when I think about the fact that I could have been going to Japan, paying for nothing but my food, taking all my money home, and was I making a grand a day in the United States? No.
That is where it starts to get.
Brother, it was hard.
Yeah.
It was a hard choice to make. And it was just that I didn't want to, I wanted to remain relative, because, like and then I say I wanted to remain relative, in the United States. Well, who cares? At the end of the day, as I sit here talking to you, and I'm 71 years old. Yeah, I mean, I have action figures and all that stuff, and I'm on all these video games, and everybody knows who the $1 Million Man is, and that wouldn't be true if I had stayed working for Giant Baba and All Japan Pro Wrestling. But I may have had more money. I may have saved more money. I don't know.
You may have made up for it though, like long term, as far as like being asked to come back to the WWF and them giving you payoffs, not to mention merch table stuff,
Yeah.
residuals from toys and VHSs and stuff like that. So, and I will say, Ted, the first time you and I spoke on the phone, I was in the car with my wife, and Jake put you on the phone, and we had our first discussion about doing a podcast together. I got off the phone, and my wife was like, "Who was that you were talking to?" And I said, "That was the $1 Million Man." She knew exactly who I was talking about. And my wife is not a wrestling fan. If I had said that was Stan Hansen, she would have been like, "Who's Stan Hansen?"
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
something to be said. Something to be said for it.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, here I am.
Here you are now.
Right.
Now, I do want to kind of get a little bit more detail on your first meeting with Vince. I know you had been around Vince previously during your first run in the Fed, but now, of course, circumstances are different. Vince Sr. is no longer the head honcho. Now Junior's in charge.
Yeah.
And we have all heard that Vince McMahon can be very eccentric. There's, I can't remember who said it, but somebody said the first time they went to his house, they were really kind of struck and taken aback by the fact that in Vince's living room, he's got a giant portrait of himself. Like this is an eccentric dude. What were your impressions of him as a man the first time that you're having a meeting with him as the head honcho?
Well, just that we. I was how could I not be impressed? Here's a guy who's basically changing the whole wrestling world. Everybody. It's like when I was a kid growing up, and my dad was a wrestler. It's like, okay, what Vince did for wrestling was put it in a place where it was kind of like old school wrestling and the old way of wrestling, as far as how we did things in the ring, that should never change. But the exposure that Vince gave to wrestling, we used to be. It was kind of like you think about pro wrestling, and it's like when the circus comes to town, you're gonna go see the wrestling matches or the regional territory shows and stuff like that. Now this guy is taking wrestling and making it a new phenomenon.
Mainstream entertainment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you say that you view Vince as a genius?
I don't know about a genius, but I mean, in terms of what he does very well is market.
Hmm.
He knew how to market this product and make it bigger than what it was. By getting these bigger than life characters. Now's when all the characters started coming. Like Jake the Snake and
The Ugandan giant.
the Mounties and all I don't know, can't remember them all now.
There were certainly plenty of the bushwhackers and what have you.
Yeah, but all these characters that you could put in a video game
Hmm.
that you could make action figures out of that you could appeal to a younger crowd, and that's what he did. Right? If he was a genius, that was a stroke of genius. So
Now, the saying always goes in wrestling: if a promoter's lips are moving, he's lying to you. So I say that to ask, Ted, right out of the gate, did you feel like Vince McMahon was a man that you could put your trust and faith into?
well, as much as anybody, right?
Hmm.
It's like it's kind of like here's a guy who is basically taking over the world that I knew, the wrestling world. He's basically moved in and taken it over, and who's going to challenge him?
Yeah.
Nobody.
And it had to feel good, you just kind of painted the picture. This is a man that's taking over the industry that you have made your entire living in. It had to feel good to have that guy, Caesar, as everybody calls him, put all of his faith into you, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Ted, I know that during your first run, you relocated to the Northeast with your first wife, and she didn't care for it. Did you and Mel ever consider making the move up to the Northeast with this huge opportunity that you now had at your fingertips?
no,
Why is that?
didn't have to. Didn't have to because I wasn't moving when I moved up there the first time. It was the New York territory, and the only towns that I was working were the towns in Massachusetts and all of the Northeast. That was the New York territory. The first time I went up there, that's what it was.
Hmm.
And so I'm not I'm not going to live in Atlanta, Georgia, and and do that. I had to get a place there. I had to get an apartment, and that's what I did. But by the time that Vince Jr. takes over, we're talking about a company that's going nationwide, and everybody, it was like when I first started, we had three. We were on 3 weeks. We'd do 21 days and do 21 cities, and then we go home for a week.
That's a lot.
And then Benny changed that. He said, "Okay, we're going to do it this way. You'll work 10 days on, and then you'll have 3 days off, and then you'll go back for 4 days, and then get 3 days off again." And so it would be 10, 3, 4, 3, 10, 3, 4, 3.
Pretty reasonable.
Pretty reasonable, but better obviously, uh, and and that's the way it was. But you could, I could live wherever I wanted to.
Yeah, I guess to your point now with Vince's national and global expansion, nationally it's just as easy for you to leave Mississippi or Atlanta or wherever you were living to go to wherever Oregon or Texas or wherever they were running. As you don't have to check in the Northeast.
Yeah, your first flight out, you're going to be going to whatever city that tour's starting in.
Yes,
Yeah.
I got you. All right, Ted, last question, and then we're going to wrap this one up for now. Of course, we will continue the story, and we're going to get into all the vignettes that you shot and all the fun stuff along the way. So we're getting there, folks. I know a lot of folks are chomping at the bit, but for now, we'll leave this one here. Ted, I know now And we all know now that this gimmick was a complete home run. Couldn't have been any better for you in your career, the $1 Million Man. But at the time, all you had ever been in wrestling was Ted DiBiase. And now you're becoming the $1 Million Man. It represents a really big departure for you as a character, and kind of your character approach whenever you're doing some of the behind the scenes things in interviews. So I say that to ask, was there any discomfort with the idea of taking on a big gimmick change like this?
Well, not really. I mean, because the only thing in terms of change would be uh, if I was cutting interviews about my opponents. That's not going to change. I mean, I'm a heel. I'm going to cut a heel interview.
Mm,
It was now though because I'm becoming this ultra rich character that I would throw money in there.
okay.
That I would. It's like I don't know. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that I would said, but it's kind of like or
In a nutshell, you're the same guy, but now you're just referencing how rich you are all the time.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Man, I love it. Obviously, the fans would all love it. Made you a WWE Hall of Famer. So really cool to kind of get the origin story behind you as a $1 Million Man and do the deep dive on it. Ted, as always, brother, I really appreciate your time. And Ted, so this weekend, I know that you're on your way to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and you're going to be doing Riddle Me This with AML Wrestling. You're going to be there. Of course, it's named after former WWE superstar Matt Riddle. He's going to be there. Brock Anderson, Arn Anderson's son, will be there.
Wow.
And still out making the towns. I'm sure that your fans down there in North Carolina are looking forward to seeing you.
Before I go to Winston-Salem, though, here's the deal: is that Thursday I'm flying to San Angelo, Texas.
Okay.
Okay, and then I fly to Charlotte, and I work in Winston-Salem on Sunday. Then I fly home from Charlotte on Monday.
Man, you are keeping awful busy. So you're going from your home in Mississippi out to San Angelo, out to Winston-Salem. Ted DiBiase still out there making the town, spending time with fans. Folks, if you can be at either of those events, don't miss it. Bring some stuff for Ted to sign. Walk up to him, shake his hand, get your photo with him. It's a really cool opportunity. Of course, if you can't be there in person, you could always get a cameo from Ted, cameo.com/MDM Ted DiBiase. Brother, cool to see you still out there doing your thing, man. I know the fans love getting to interact with you.
Yeah, it's always good. I tell you, wrestling fans are the greatest fans in the world, man. They're once they're a fan, they're a fan.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there's so many guys that I've run into that are older now and it's kind of like, man, I've been watching you since I was a kid. I hear it all the time. Been watching you since I was, in high school or whatever. But it's great to have fans. Hey, if it weren't for fans, I wouldn't have had a job.
Great. That's great.
For all those people that went out and spent all that money to buy a ticket. Hey, thank you so much for being a fan. Appreciate it.
Man, it's cool.
But always remember, everybody's got a price for the $1 Million Man.
We can't end the episode any better than that. We'll catch you next time right here on Everybody's Got a Pot.
$1 million dream, tell them all good night.